The fluorescent lights in Grant Hollow High's main hallway buzzed with the same frequency as the anxiety humming through Talia Brooks's chest. She didn't know that, in exactly 47 days, those same lights would flicker above a courtroom where a judge would hand down a verdict that would change everything about how schools handle bullying forever. But that Tuesday morning in October, all Talia knew was the weight of her backpack and the familiar dread that settled in her stomach like swallowed stones. "Mom, I can walk myself to class," she'd said 20 minutes earlier, standing in their modest kitchen where her father, David, sat reviewing legal briefs for his work as a paralegal at Henderson and Associates. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the man who helped lawyers build cases couldn't seem to build a case strong enough to protect his own daughter. "Sweetheart, I know you can," her mother Lisa had replied, adjusting Talia's collar with the gentle precision of someone who'd learned to find comfort in small gestures of care. "But let me have this moment." David looked up from his papers, his reading glasses reflecting the morning light. "T, if anything happens today, anything at all, you document it. Time, place, witnesses, every detail matters in legal proceedings." "Dad, it's just high school." "No," he said quietly, and something in his tone made Talia pause at the door. "It stopped being just high school the moment they made you afraid to learn." Now, standing at her locker with those words echoing in her mind, Talia understood what her father meant. The fear had become a living thing, coiled around her ribs, making every breath deliberate. She pulled out her chemistry textbook, and a folded piece of paper fluttered to the ground. Her heart clenched. Not again. The note was written in purple ink, the kind Chloe Dalton used to sign her name with flourishes on everything from bathroom stall graffiti to yearbook pages. The message was simple. "Nobody wants you here." Talia glanced around the hallway. 3 lockers down, Madison Chen was watching with the expression of someone who'd seen this before but never knew what to do about it. Near the water fountain, Trevor Mitchell pretended to be fascinated by his phone screen, but Talia caught him glancing in her direction. They all knew, they all saw, and they all did nothing. The first bell rang, and Talia folded the note carefully, placing it in the front pocket of her binder with the other 17 notes she'd collected over the past month. Her father's voice echoed again. "Every detail matters." Chemistry class was 3rd period, which meant Talia had 2 hours to build the internal armor she'd need to sit 3 seats behind Chloe Dalton, while Mrs. Peterson droned about molecular bonds, completely oblivious to the fact that different kinds of bonds were being systematically destroyed in her classroom. But first, she had English with Mr. Davies, who actually noticed things. "Today we're discussing To Kill a Mockingbird," Mr. Davies announced as students settled into their seats. "Specifically, we're looking at how Atticus Finch tells Scout that you never really understand a person until you consider things from their point of view." Talia's pen moved across her notebook almost involuntarily. She'd read the book twice, but today the words felt different, heavier. "Can anyone give me an example of when someone in the novel fails to consider another person's perspective?" Mr. Davies asked. Silence stretched across the room like a held breath. Talia's hand rose halfway, then faltered. She could feel eyes on her, some curious, some indifferent, some calculating. In the back row, she knew without looking that Chloe's friends were watching, waiting for any sign of weakness they could later weaponize. "Talia," Mr. Davies prompted gently. "The jury," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. They couldn't see past Tom Robinson's skin color to see his humanity. "They made their decision before they heard the evidence. Something shifted in the room's energy. Mr. Davies nodded slowly. Excellent observation. And what about in our own lives? When do we fail to see each other's full humanity? The question hung in the air like smoke from a struck match. Talia felt the familiar burn in her chest, the one that came when truth pressed too close to the surface. After class, she walked to her locker with Mr. Davies's words still echoing. Another note waited. This one stuck to her locker door with pink gum. Take a hint, as she peeled off the sticky paper. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check Instagram. And her hands trembled as she opened the app. The post was already there, waiting like a digital landmine. A photo of her from yesterday's lunch period, sitting alone at the corner table with her turkey sandwich and water bottle. But someone had edited the image, adding text that made her stomach lurch. Grant Hollow's charity case, like if you think she should transfer schools. 43 likes already. The comments were worse. Who even is she? My mom says her dad can't even afford a real lawyer job, lol. Maybe if she tried to make friends, instead of acting like she's better than everyone. Talia's finger hovered over the report button, but she hesitated. 3 weeks ago, she'd reported a similar post, and nothing had happened, except Chloe had cornered her after gym class to whisper, "Snitches get stitches, scholarship girl." Instead, she took a screenshot, then another, her father's training kicking in document, everything. The hallway noise faded as students headed to their next classes, leaving Talia alone with her phone and the growing realization that this wasn't going to stop. It was going to escalate. She could feel it in the deliberate cruelty of the post, in the calculated timing designed to ruin her entire day. Chemistry class loomed ahead like a storm front. Mrs. Peterson's classroom smelled like sulfur and broken dreams. The periodic table stretched across the back wall like a map to territories Talia would never explore if she couldn't survive high school first. "Partner lab today," Mrs. Peterson announced without looking up from her desk. "Choose wisely. Your grade depends on cooperation." Talia's stomach dropped. Partner assignments were social warfare disguised as education. She watched as students paired off with the easy familiarity of friendship, leaving her standing beside the lab bench like a question nobody wanted to answer. "Looks like you're with me," came a voice from behind her. Talia turned to find Chloe Dalton standing there with the kind of smile that looked generous, until you saw what lived behind her eyes. "Lucky me," Chloe continued, her voice loud enough for nearby students to hear. "I get to carry the load again," Mrs. Peterson called for attention, explaining the experiment on chemical reactions and equilibrium. Talia tried to focus on the instructions, but awareness of Chloe's presence felt like having a wasp trapped under a glass. You knew it was going to sting. You just didn't know when. They worked in silence for the first few minutes, measuring solutions and recording observations. Then Chloe leaned closer, her voice low enough that only Talia could hear. "Did you like my Instagram post?" Talia's hand stilled on the graduated cylinder. "I saw it." "Good, because this is just the beginning." Chloe's tone was conversational, almost friendly. "See, my dad's running for mayor next year, and having someone like you in our class doesn't exactly fit the image he's trying to project. Someone like me, poor, desperate, taking up space that belongs to students whose families actually contribute to this community." The words hit Talia like physical blows, but she kept her expression neutral. Years of her father's legal training had taught her to never react emotionally when someone was trying to provoke you. "My family contributes," Talia said quietly. Your dad's a secretary with a fancy title, and your mom cleans houses. That's not contributing. That's surviving. Chloe's smile widened as she watched Talia's face. Oh, did you think people didn't know honey? This is Grant Hollow. Everyone knows everything about everyone, including how your parents can barely afford to keep you in those discount store clothes. Something inside Talia cracked, but she held steady. At least I know who I am without my daddy's money. The temperature in their little corner of the lab seemed to drop 10 degrees. Chloe's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something raw and ugly underneath. You think you're smart, don't you? Chloe's voice was barely a whisper now. You think being the quiet little victim makes you noble. But let me tell you something. Nobility doesn't pay for college. Connections do. And you don't have any. She paused, pretending to check their lab results while delivering the killing blow. Ask your precious daddy about the Henderson firm. Ask him about the case they lost last month because David Brooks made a filing error. Ask him how long they're keeping him around. The blood drained from Talia's face. Her father had been quieter lately, more stressed, extra papers on the kitchen table, longer phone calls behind closed doors. That's right, Chloe continued, reading Talia's expression like a roadmap to her worst fears. My dad knows Mr. Henderson personally. They play golf, and word is, your dad's job is hanging by a thread. The beaker in Talia's hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something much more dangerous, rage. So here's what's going to happen, Chloe said, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. You're going to transfer schools, quietly, before Christmas, because if you don't, things are going to get much worse for your family. Not just you. Your family. Talia set down the beaker with deliberate care. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but something fundamental had shifted inside her. No. Excuse me? I said no. Talia turned to face Chloe fully for the first time in months. I'm not transferring. I'm not hiding. And I'm definitely not letting you threaten my family. Chloe's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. You think you have a choice? I think you just made a mistake. What mistake? Talia's phone was in her hand, the voice recorder app running. She'd started recording the moment Chloe mentioned her father's job, another lesson from David Brooks about protecting yourself legally. The mistake of thinking I'm as powerless as you need me to be. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Chloe Dalton looked uncertain. The lab class ended with both girls turning in results that neither would remember. But as students filed out, Talia remained at her station, uploading the audio recording to her cloud storage and sending a copy to herself via email. Documentation. Evidence. The foundation of every legal case her father had ever worked on. She was halfway to her locker when her phone exploded with notifications. Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, a digital avalanche of cruelty that made the morning's post look like a love letter. Someone had created a fake profile using her school photo and was posting increasingly vicious content. Photos of her house with captions about Section 8 housing, screenshots of her mother's cleaning service ad with laughing face emojis, a video compilation of her walking alone through the halls set to music from a sad movie. Each post had dozens of likes, shares, comments that ranged from casual mockery to outright viciousness. Students she'd never spoken to were participating in the destruction of her reputation like it was a group project. But the worst part wasn't the content. It was the realization that this level of coordination required planning. This wasn't random teenage cruelty. This was a campaign. Talia found herself in the bathroom, locked in a stall, hands shaking as she scrolled through post after post. The logical part of her mind, the part trained by her father's methodical approach to problems, was taking screenshots and saving everything. But the emotional part, the 17-year-old girl who just wanted to learn chemistry and read books, and maybe go to college someday, that part was drowning. A toilet flushed in the next stall, followed by footsteps and running water. Then a voice she recognized. "I know you're in there, Talia. Madison Chen, from her locker this morning." "Everyone's talking about those posts," Madison continued. "It's not right." Silence. "My parents are lawyers," Madison said quietly. "Civil rights stuff. If you need someone to talk to..." The stall door between them might as well have been a canyon. Talia wanted to respond, wanted to reach out, but trust felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. "I saved screenshots, too," Madison added, "just in case." Footsteps retreated. A door closed. Talia was alone again with her phone and the growing weight of what was happening to her life. She stayed in that stall until the final bell rang, until the hallways emptied and the school settled into its after-hours quiet. Only then did she emerge, walking through the empty corridors toward the main entrance where her mother would be waiting. But as she passed the main office, she heard voices through the partially open door. Principal Morrison's voice, and another she recognized as Mr. Henderson, her father's boss. "Unfortunate situation with David Brooks. Filing errors can't be overlooked, especially in high-profile cases." "I understand, Mr. Henderson. These things happen. I'm afraid they happen too frequently with Brooks. We'll be making a change by the end of the month." Talia pressed herself against the wall outside the office, her heart hammering against her ribs. Chloe had been telling the truth. Her father was losing his job, and somehow, impossibly, it was connected to what was happening to her at school. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Chloe's father was running for mayor. Mr. Henderson's law firm handled municipal contracts. David Brooks was a convenient pressure point to apply against a family that had become inconvenient. This wasn't just high school bullying. This was something much bigger, much more calculated, and much more dangerous. As she finally walked toward the parking lot, Talia pulled out her phone and did something she'd never done before. She called her father directly. "Dad, we need to talk, tonight, about everything." "Talia, what's wrong?" "I think," she said, watching Chloe Dalton climb into a BMW driven by her perfectly manicured mother. "I think they just made the mistake of picking a fight with the wrong family." Because David Brooks had taught his daughter many things over the years. How to research, how to document, how to build a case piece by piece until the truth became undeniable. What he hadn't taught her, what she was discovering on her own, was how it felt when someone pushed you past the point of quiet endurance. That night, sitting at the kitchen table with legal pads and file folders spread between them, father and daughter began building something together, not just a defense, but a reckoning. The soft glow of the desk lamp illuminated pages of notes, screenshots, and carefully documented evidence. Outside, Grant Hollow slept peacefully, unaware that in one modest kitchen, the foundation was being laid for a case that would change everything. "Tell me again about the voice recording," David said, his pen moving across a legal pad with the precision of 20 years' experience. "She threatened our family," Talia repeated. "Specifically mentioned your job. Said her father has influence with Mr. Henderson. The whole thing was calculated to force me to transfer schools." Lisa Brooks sat across from them, her cleaning service uniform replaced by comfortable sweats, but her expression was anything but relaxed. "How long has this been going on, baby?" "Months, but it escalated today. The social media stuff. The coordination, it's not random anymore. It's systematic." David looked up from his notes. "In legal terms, we're looking at several potential claims. Cyberbullying under state law. Possible civil rights violations if we can prove discriminatory intent. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. And potentially conspiracy if multiple parties are coordinating." "Dad, I don't want to be a legal case. I just want it to stop." "Sweetheart," he said gently, "sometimes the only way to make it stop is to make the cost of continuing too high to bear." They worked until almost midnight, organizing evidence, documenting patterns, building what David called the foundation. When they finally closed the folders, something had shifted in the Brooks household. They were no longer just enduring, they were preparing. The next morning brought a text from Madison Chen. "My mom wants to talk to your parents. She's seen cases like this before." And later, an email from an unknown address. "Ms. Brooks, my name is Angela Morrison. I'm an attorney specializing in educational civil rights. I believe we should meet." The machinery of justice was beginning to turn, slowly but inevitably, like a great wheel gathering momentum. But Chloe Dalton wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The message came through Instagram direct message at lunchtime. "Tomorrow, cafeteria, you'll see what happens to girls who don't know their place." Talia screenshot the threat and forwarded it to the growing chain of evidence. Then she did something that would have seemed impossible just days before. She smiled. Because tomorrow, she wouldn't be walking into that cafeteria as a victim. She'd be walking in as someone with allies, with legal representation, and with a voice recorder running in her pocket. Most importantly, she'd be walking in as someone who had finally learned the difference between being quiet and being powerless. The difference, as it turned out, was everything. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Talia Brooks walked through the front doors of Grant Hollow High carrying more than just her backpack. She carried the weight of documented evidence, the support of legal representation, and something she hadn't felt in months, hope. Her phone buzzed with a text from Angela Morrison, the civil rights attorney who had somehow found them in their darkest hour. Recording device checked. Remember, stay calm. Let her reveal herself. We only get one shot at this. In her pocket, the small digital recorder felt warm against her palm. Her father had tested it 3 times that morning, his paralegal training ensuring every detail was perfect. The most powerful weapon in any legal case, he'd told her over breakfast, is letting your opponent destroy themselves with their own words. The hallway felt different today. Students moved through their morning routines, unaware that the invisible war that had been raging in their midst was about to become very visible. Talia noticed things she'd missed before the way conversation stopped when certain students walked by. The careful choreography of social hierarchies, the quiet suffering hidden behind carefully constructed masks. Madison Chen fell into step beside her at the lockers. "You ready for this?" "As ready as anyone can be for social warfare," Talia replied, surprised by her own steady voice. "My mom's been researching similar cases all night. She says what's happening here isn't unique, but the way we're documenting it is. Most families don't have your dad's legal background." Trevor Mitchell appeared at Talia's other side, his usual phone screen focus replaced by something that looked like determination. "I saved all the screenshots, too, from yesterday. My little sister goes to middle school, and she deserves better than inheriting this toxic environment. The alliance forming around Talia felt surreal. For months, she'd felt completely isolated, but now she realized she'd never been alone. Other students had been watching, documenting, waiting for someone brave enough to make the first move. First period English brought an unexpected development. Mr. Davies pulled Talia aside after class. "I've been hearing things," he said quietly, "about social media posts, harassment. I want you to know that some of us have been watching too." "Sir," teachers talk. "Talia, we've been documenting incidents, noting patterns. Mrs. Peterson mentioned the lab partner situation yesterday, the way certain students are treated differently, how complaints seem to disappear into administrative black holes." He handed her a manila envelope. "If you ever need witness statements from faculty who've observed these patterns, you'll have them." The envelope felt heavy in her hands, not just with paper, but with the weight of adults finally taking responsibility for what they'd allowed to happen in their classrooms. By lunch, word had spread through the school's invisible network that something was going to happen in the cafeteria. Students lingered longer at their lockers, moved more slowly through the halls, as if sensing the approaching storm. Talia entered the cafeteria at exactly 12:15 p.m., her usual time. The recorder in her pocket was running. Madison and Trevor sat at a nearby table, phones discreetly positioned. At the back corner, she spotted two people she didn't recognize, adults trying to blend in but failing at teenage casual. Private investigators. Angela Morrison had explained during their emergency meeting the night before. Sometimes the best defense is making sure everything is witnessed by professionals. Chloe Dalton sat at her usual center table, surrounded by her usual court of followers. But today felt different. There was an electric tension in the air, the kind that comes before lightning strikes. Talia bought her lunch turkey sandwich, apple, water bottle, and moved toward her corner table. Behind her, she could hear the subtle shift in conversation volume, the way sound changes when everyone is pretending not to watch something. She'd barely sat down when Chloe's voice cut across the cafeteria like a blade. "Well, well, look who decided to show up today." The room went quiet, with the surgical precision of a conductor's baton. Chloe stood, her movements deliberate and theatrical, designed for maximum audience impact. "You know, everybody," Chloe continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the space. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about belonging, about knowing your place." She began walking toward Talia's table, her followers trailing behind like a wake of destruction. Some people just don't get subtle hints. Some people need more direct communication. Talia remained seated, her hand near her pocket, watching Chloe approach with the calculated calm her father had taught her. In legal proceedings, emotional reactions destroyed credibility. Stay neutral. Let the aggressor reveal themselves. "See, the thing about charity cases," Chloe said, now standing directly beside Talia's table, "is that they start to think they deserve to be here. They forget that their presence is conditional on good behavior." Around the cafeteria, phones were emerging from pockets and backpacks. Not to participate in cruelty this time, but to document it. Students were finally understanding that silence was complicity, and some of them were tired of being complicit. "Stand up," Chloe commanded. Talia looked up at her with steady eyes. "No. I said stand up. We're going to have a conversation about respect. We're having a conversation right now. Say what you came to say." Chloe's mask slipped slightly, revealing the frustration underneath. This wasn't going according to her script. Talia was supposed to be afraid, supposed to cower, supposed to run. Fine, since you want to do this the hard way. Chloe's voice rose to ensure every person in the cafeteria could hear. Everyone needs to understand what happens when people like you try to take spaces that belong to people like us. She reached into her bag and pulled out a brown paper lunch sack, the kind Talia brought every day because her family couldn't afford the cafeteria meal plan. But this bag was different, heavier, suspicious. This, Chloe announced, holding the bag above Talia's head, is where you belong. She turned the bag upside down. What poured out wasn't food. It was garbage, moldy bread, rotten fruit. Something that might have once been meat, but had decayed beyond recognition. The smell hit the cafeteria like a physical force, making students gasp and recoil. But the smell was nothing compared to the symbolism. Chloe had brought rotting garbage to pour over another human being in front of 100 witnesses. The cruelty was so deliberate, so calculated, so completely dehumanizing that it left the room in stunned silence. Talia sat perfectly still as pieces of moldy food dripped from her hair onto her shoulders. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't run. Instead, she pulled out her phone and stopped the voice recording app. Then she looked up at Chloe with eyes that were no longer those of a victim. "Thank you," she said quietly. "What?" "I said thank you for finally showing everyone exactly who you are." Chloe's confusion was visible. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. Around the cafeteria, the silence had a different quality now, not the silence of complicity, but the silence of witnesses realizing they'd just watched something irreversible happen. "You think this is over?" Chloe snarled, her careful public mask completely abandoned now. "You think your little recording means anything? My father owns this town. My family has connections you can't even imagine." "I'm sure they do," Talia said, standing slowly, pieces of rotten food falling to the floor around her. "But your family doesn't own the law." She pulled a business card from her pocket, Angela Morrison's card, which she'd been carrying like a talisman. "This is my attorney, civil rights law. She's very interested in what you just did." "Attorney," Chloe laughed, but it sounded forced now. "Your daddy, the paralegal, got you a lawyer with what money? Pro bono," Talia said simply. "That's what happens when your case involves constitutional violations and federal civil rights law." The color began draining from Chloe's face as the implications hit her. Around the cafeteria, phones were still recording, still documenting, but now the audience understood they weren't watching a typical bullying incident. They were watching evidence being created in real time. "You can't prove anything," Chloe said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Actually, I can. Voice recordings of your threats, screenshots of every social media post, witness statements from teachers who've been documenting patterns of harassment, medical records showing the psychological impact of sustained bullying, and now, video evidence of assault with about 50 witnesses." Talia began walking toward the cafeteria exit, rotten food still clinging to her clothes, but her head held high. "Oh, and Chloe, my father didn't lose his job. Mr. Henderson called this morning. Apparently, someone with connections to your family had been pressuring him to fire my dad. That's called retaliation, and it's also illegal." She paused at the cafeteria door and turned back. "See you in court." The silence that followed was deafening. Within 24 hours, everything changed. The video of the cafeteria incident had been uploaded to multiple platforms by student witnesses, but not as entertainment, as evidence. #Justice for Talia began trending locally. then regionally, as people shared their own stories of systemic bullying that schools had failed to address. Angela Morrison filed a comprehensive lawsuit that named not just Chloe Dalton, but the school district for failing to provide a safe learning environment, and included a civil rights complaint with the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. What many people don't understand, Angela explained to Talia and her parents in her downtown office, is that Title IX doesn't just cover sexual harassment, it covers any form of harassment based on protected characteristics that creates a hostile educational environment. The discovery process revealed what everyone had suspected, but no one had been able to prove. Grant Hollow High had a documented pattern of ignoring harassment complaints when they involved students from influential families. 17 other students had filed reports about various incidents over the past 3 years. None had been properly investigated. The school's own records condemned them, Angela said, spreading files across her conference table. They kept meticulous documentation of every complaint filed, and equally meticulous documentation of why each complaint was dismissed or ignored. The depositions were scheduled for December. Chloe Dalton, forced to testify under oath, revealed the calculated nature of her campaign against Talia. The edited videos, the coordinated social media attacks, the deliberate targeting based on socioeconomic status, all of it documented in legally admissible statements. But the most damaging testimony came from school administrators who couldn't explain why certain students seemed immune from consequences, while others were punished for minor infractions. The pattern shows clear discriminatory enforcement, Angela explained to the mediator during settlement negotiations. Students from wealthy families received what the school called restorative guidance for serious offenses, while students from working-class families received suspensions for dress code violations. Principal Morrison, faced with 20 years of documented evidence of unequal treatment, resigned the week before Christmas. The financial settlement was substantial, $250,000 in compensatory and punitive damages from the Dalton family, and $500,000 from the school district. But, more importantly, the consent decree required systemic changes that would affect every student who walked through Grant Hollow High's doors for years to come. The courtroom was packed on the January morning when Judge Patricia Hendricks read the final order. Students, parents, teachers, and community members filled every seat as she outlined the mandatory reforms, anonymous reporting systems with legal protections for reporters, quarterly audits by independent monitors, mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, and a victim offender mediation program focused on restorative rather than punitive justice. This case, Judge Hendricks said, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom, represents a failure of institutional responsibility. When schools allow harassment to flourish unchecked, they fail not just the victims, but the perpetrators who could have been guided toward better choices. She turned to face Chloe Dalton directly. "Young lady, instead of jail time, you'll serve 200 hours of community service with anti-bullying nonprofits. You'll participate in victim offender mediation if Ms. Brooks agrees. And you'll speak publicly about the consequences of harassment. Your actions hurt another human being, but they also revealed systemic problems that needed addressing." Finally, she addressed Talia. "Ms. Brooks, your courage in documenting and reporting these incidents has created change that will protect other students for years to come. You've shown that one voice, supported by evidence and legal advocacy, can challenge systems that seemed immovable." The applause that followed wasn't the cruel mockery of the cafeteria, but the recognition of justice finally served. 6 months later, Talia Brooks sat in the same corner of the same cafeteria where her nightmare had begun. But everything else had changed. The anonymous reporting system had generated 47 reports in its first month, leading to interventions that prevented escalation rather than punishing aftermath. The peer mediation program had reduced conflicts by 60%. Most importantly, the school's culture had shifted from one of silent complicity to active allyship. Madison Chen sat beside her now, along with Trevor Mitchell and 3 other students who had formed what they called the Documentation Coalition, students trained to recognize and properly report harassment when they witnessed it. "Did you see the news from the state capitol?" Madison asked, showing Talia her phone. "They're using our case as a model for new legislation. The Brooks Protocol for handling harassment in schools." Talia smiled, but her focus was on something else. Across the cafeteria, Chloe Dalton sat with a much smaller group now. Her social empire reduced but not destroyed. She'd completed her community service and participated in mediation sessions that had been difficult but transformative for both girls. They weren't friends, might never be friends, but they'd learned to coexist in the same space with a mutual understanding of consequences. "I got into State University," Talia announced to her table, pulling out the acceptance letter she'd been carrying around like a treasure. "Full scholarship." The admissions essay about advocacy and legal reform apparently resonated with their review committee. The celebration was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Peterson, the chemistry teacher, approached their table with something that looked like nervousness. "Talia, I wanted to apologize for not seeing what was happening in my classroom, for not intervening when I should have." Mrs. Peterson, "No, let me finish. I've been teaching for 15 years, and I told myself that what happened between students wasn't my responsibility, as long as it didn't interfere with learning. But I was wrong. Everything interferes with learning when students don't feel safe." She handed Talia a recommendation letter. "For whatever you decide to study in college, I suspect you'll make an excellent lawyer someday." As Mrs. Peterson walked away, Talia looked around the cafeteria at the posters about bystander intervention, at the diverse groups of students sitting together, at the faculty members who now moved through the space with active awareness rather than willful blindness. Her phone buzzed with a text from Angela Morrison. "Harvard Law called. They want to interview you for early admission. Interested?" Talia showed the message to her friends, who erupted in excitement and congratulations. But as she typed her response, she was thinking about something else, about all the students who would walk through Grant Hollow's doors in the years to come, who would benefit from the changes that had grown from one girl's decision to document instead of endure. "Very interested," she typed back. "When do we start?" Because Talia Brooks had learned something important over the past year. Justice wasn't something that happened to you, it was something you built, piece by piece, case by case, with courage and documentation and the unwavering belief that every voice mattered. Outside, the same autumn wind that had blown through Grant Hollow's hallways on that terrible October morning was blowing again. But this time, it carried the scent of possibility instead of fear. And, in a modest kitchen across town, David Brooks sat at the same table where he and his daughter had once built a legal case in desperation, now helping other families navigate similar fights. The paralegal had become an advocate. The victim had become a voice for change. And the Brooks family had learned that sometimes the best way to survive injustice is to ensure it doesn't survive you. The fluorescent lights in Grant Hollow High still buzzed with the same frequency as before, but the anxiety that had once hummed through the halls at that same pitch had been replaced by something different, the steady rhythm of a school learning to protect all its students, not just the privileged ones, and in courtrooms across the state. Judges were reading about a case called Brooks v. Grant Hollow, which had become precedent for how schools must respond when one student's pain becomes everyone's responsibility to address. The quiet girl who had once carried her suffering in silence now carried a voice that echoed in every classroom where a vulnerable student needed protection, in every legal brief arguing for educational equity, and in every community willing to admit that sometimes the most important lessons happen outside the curriculum. Justice, as it turned out, had its own viral moments. They just spread more slowly, more deliberately, and with far more lasting impact than cruelty ever could. And years later, when Talia Brooks graduated Harvard Law School and opened her practice specializing in educational civil rights, she kept a framed photo on her desk, not of her courtroom victories or prestigious awards, but of that first manila folder where a scared teenager and her paralegal father had documented injustice by the light of their kitchen lamp, proving that courage begins with refusing to let cruelty go unrecorded.